Thanks, John. Thanks, convener.
Missed that. All right. Apologies and substitutions.
Apologies, convener, from Councillor Miles, substituted today by Councillor David Lumgear.
Thank you. So that's only Councillor Brown that hasn't shown up. Right, okay. Right, this is the last meeting of Scrutiny and Audit in this administration. However, I would remind you all that we have the self-assessment meeting on the 10th of March at 10 o'clock. So don't think that's you completely finished just yet. All right, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. Thank you. Minute of the previous meeting. I didn't see anything that needs to be raised from that. Is that agreed as a correct minute?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Right. Item 4 is the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Can I ask on Stephen Wood, accompanied by Scott Gibson, to take that report, which commences on page 10.
Thank you very much, convener, and good afternoon, committee members. You'll hopefully have had time to digest the information contained within the Q3 monitoring report, and I'd like to move directly to the performance summary on page 6 of the report, which I think is page 17 of your information pack. If we look firstly at the indicators relating to accidental dwelling fires, you can see that there were 20 accidental dwelling fires in the period, and I'm sure you'll all be aware that an incident in South Street in Fuller, firefighters rescued a young female from a property who sadly succumbed to her injuries shortly afterwards. And whilst fire fatalities have steadily decreased across Scotland in recent years, the impact of such an incident is truly devastating. And both locally and nationally, we really seek to understand all the circumstances that lead to incidents like that. So to support that aim, we carry out a full case conference with partners. This work is currently being led by Group Commander Gibson, who's on the call, and also with the support of a number of other colleagues who are also on the call. So in addition to that longer term work, we also provide an immediate post-incident community response, which is really looking to reassure and provide fire safety advice to the local community. We continue to ask people to consider friends, families and neighbours and promote the SFRS Make the Call campaign, which helps us to reach people in the community who may not be inclined to seek our help and support directly. So at times like these, I think it brings it home to people that there is active steps that people can take to help us all prevent these tragedies from happening. I'd like now to move on to the headline indicators across non-domestic premises, including the numbers of fires, fire casualties, both fatal and non-fatal. And you will see that they're all reporting on or below our target figure. And then similarly for road traffic collisions and casualties, they're continuing on a downward trajectory as well. Unwanted fire alarm signals, deliberate primary fires and deliberate secondary fires. They're all below average for the quarter, but they are tracking above the annual target, just based on higher than average figures in previous quarters. So before I ask the committee to scrutinise, comment and note the report, I'd like to ask Group Commander Gibson just to provide you with a little bit more context to the headline figures that I've presented. And I'd also ask Scott to provide us with some further detail on some of the great community initiatives that have been undertaken throughout the summer, and they're detailed in the back of the report there. So over to you, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, convener. Good afternoon, everyone. Just referring to the performance highlights page of the report, page 18 of your report packs, I'll just briefly go through some of the bullet points and some of the information in more detail contained within those bullet points. Bullet points 1 and 2, again, slight decrease in the numbers of accidental dwelling fires. Stephen's already covered the tragic events that happened back in October in Forfar. It just highlights the dangers that people can succumb to these dangers. We're also set to deliver the virtual safety siders in May, which will hopefully emphasise the safety message to all our school children again. Good to see that back up and running. And that's not just all about fire, that's about safety in other areas of life. Appendix 2, which I'll cover in a bit more detail at the end of my end of this, about some of the fantastic work done by our stations with partners, some of which in delivering breakfast and lunches over the Challenge Poverty Week to the communities, whilst at the same time being able to offer advice and where members of the communities can find that advice if they need it. Bullet point 3, we've only experienced 5 non-domestic fires, and that continues to be low within Angus. At bullet point 4, slight increase in the number of road traffic collisions during Q3, mainly around Brecon, Forfar, Carnoustie and Ardroth. However, no fatal casualties and 4 non-fatal casualties showing minor injuries. Some of the other special services, a bit of context around that, there was 80 additional special services that we attended, over half of which were effecting entry and assisting other agencies, predominantly where there was concern for us, and the remainder were made up of acting as a first responder, flooding, hazardous materials, suicide attempts and other types of rescues. At bullet point 5, I've highlighted the UFAS incidents were below average during Q3. As we know, the service are keen to reduce our attendance at these incidents to reduce road risk and maximise the time for other types of work. And committee are aware of the recent consultation, which is now concluded regarding this, with the preferred option based around call challenging in non-domestic premises. And if no fire is confirmed, then we will not respond. And sleeping risks are exempt from this, and this will be implemented from April 2023. And it's estimated to see around a 57% reduction in our UFAS activity across the country. Referring to bullet point 6, there's been a decrease in deliberate primary and secondary fires. However, as Stephen pointed out, the previous quarters have led to the inability perhaps to achieve ambitious targets that we'll have set, and we'll have to see what Q4 brings. But we are carrying out a lot of work in this area. We're doing a lot of work with partners, and we did during Q3 to reduce this. We put a full set of bonfire-related materials out to all head teachers to be delivered to pupils. We also sent business letters to owner-occupiers regarding the build-up of combustibles and handed out leaflets to anyone purchasing fireworks. We welcomed our first group of firefighters through Ardroth Fire Station as part of the Prince's Trust for the first time since the start of the pandemic, which was a great success. And I'd just like to go in and just give a little bit more detail about a couple of the other areas that we've been working on and initiatives that we've carried out in the Angus area for groups of people. One of these was in Appendix 2 that I've spoke about around a pilot young fire skills programme that we led on at Rossie Young People's Trust in Montrose at the start of December. It involved 8 students from the residential side of their facility, and we engaged in 6 days over a 2-week period on skills, teaching them skills around basic fireground drills, pumps, ladders, life support, CPR, first aid, road traffic collisions and breathing apparatus. It began with a very shy and uneasy group of young men who then flourished as individuals by the end of it and gelled well to work as part of a team. These young males had been disengaged with schooling and learning and found themselves in the situation they were in. We're looking now to progress this partnership with the Rossie Trust and other partners, and bringing in colleagues from Police Scotland and the Coast Guard to assist with this and further run these programmes throughout the spring, summer and autumn of this year. And then eventually we're hoping to develop some kind of work placement programme that we can put into place from this. I've already mentioned the work done around the Challenge Poverty Week and bringing people into stations for lunch clubs and breakfast clubs and offering advice, which was another good initiative during Q3. And we continue with the Man Down project that we're carrying out in Montrose as well. That concludes this part of the report, and I'm listening and happy to accept any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Whiteside.
Thanks, Convener. Page 24, please.
Councillor Bell.
Page 31, please, Convener.
Councillor Duff. You're mute, Bill.
Sorry, Convener, can I have a comment on page 31?
Yeah. Okay, everybody happy?
I put my hand up there as well, I think. Hold on.
Brian?
I would like to make a comment on page 32, Alec.
Comment, page 32, right. Okay. Councillors Whiteside, Bell and Devine, that'll be historic hands, is it?
No.
No?
I want
Lynn,
to comment
sorry.
on 33, please.
33. Right. Have we got everybody now? Okay. Right, we'll start with Councillor Whiteside, page 31. Sorry, 24.
Thanks, convener, and thanks to Mr. Gibson, Mr. Wood, for your report. I always like hearing about the community safety engagements and the notable events. But my question's around the new road safety engagement strategy that's taken place. We see that's in its early stages, and I wonder if we could get a little bit more information about that. I noticed that Safe Drive is suspended again, and that was obviously a very, very useful initiative. So interested to hear what else is on the cards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Whiteside, for the question. Yes, we are moving at some pace now. We've cast our net wide to see what other options are out there. We do have some existing tools within the area. There was a significant investment in virtual reality headsets just prior to the pandemic, but obviously we've been unable to use those, but hopefully they will come back on stream. What we're doing is we're working, previously Safe Drive was extremely resource intensive for the fire service. The Tayside Road Safety Forum has taken a much greater role in this, so a much more collaborative approach to this. And we do have a young driver initiative underway now. It moves the focus slightly to a slightly older age group. I think that there's a fair bit of research and science done in the background around maximising the impact, and I think the sort of theatrical performance, while hugely hard-hitting, there's been a number of studies that show the longer-term effect of that's been quite hard to quantify, and we have occasionally missed some pupils that perhaps go out, get apprenticeships, leave early, and are probably the ones most likely to be driving at a younger age. So the focus has switched slightly onto those. The forum is doing a significant amount of work. I don't have a date for when we can go live or how we're going to roll this out. But certainly between our virtual reality headsets and the work of the Road Safety Forum, we will bring something forward as soon as possible. Just unfortunately, the Safe Drive event, the resources required, that interactive theatrical production, I think served us really well for a number of years. We need to probably evolve slightly now and think about how children are learning, maybe a bit more interactive in smaller groups. So that's the way we're looking at, and we'll certainly keep the committee updated as soon as we've got some concrete dates and plans to bring forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Bell, page 31.
Okay, thank you, and thank you both, Stephen and Scott. I'm particularly impressed by your community safety work, and I've seen it deepen and develop over the years. The challenge poverty stuff went down really, really well in Kirriemuir, but I particularly wanted to pick up on the Rossi Trust work. I'm guessing this is underpinned by your commitment to the promise, and I'm excited about it progressing. Might there be scope to develop like modern apprenticeship roles to engage with young people as you go forward with this? I was quite keen to see a kind of gender balance around that as well, to see what you can come up with there. Is that something that might be possible for you?
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Bell. I don't think anything's off the table with this. It was really quite an experimental. It was a different group of individuals on the course. We've done programmes like this across the country, but we really did. We really focused on a practical, hands-on initiative, and I did get the pleasure of going up and seeing the sort of final exercise. And the feedback I got from the staff at Rossi was just about how much these individuals had come on in terms of communicating with each other and the teamwork and their confidence. It really was quite impressive to see. So we're kind of fresh from that first flush of success with it. We've done an evaluation, and there's the possibility of a funding bid that we're involved in at the moment, just looking to develop it as much as we can. I think there's some buildings up there that we could look to expand. So how we fill that space if we're successful, I think everything would be considered. I really would like to expand that, and we're off to a great start with it. We just need to make sure we can replicate it and it becomes a sustainable model and we get the most out of it. So I really welcome any input you've got, any ideas. But yeah, I'm really pleased with how the first one went, and it's something that we just want to make that the start, and we'll grow it as much as we can and get the maximum benefit, because I think these initiatives really are a longer term investment. We might see something feeding through into our performance indicators in the short term, but I'm not too concerned about that. I think it's 5-10 years time down the road. We'll maybe try and see where some of these individuals ended up, and hopefully would play some small part in a positive destination. So yeah, we'll keep you posted on that, and everything is on the table.
Thank you.
Councillor Duff, you wanted to make a comment on that page?
Yeah, thanks, Kavira. Yeah, I just wanted to say I was really pleased to see that your involvement with the Man Down organisation in Montrose. I've had some dealings with them myself, and equally, very pleased to see you up at Rossy School. Again, I've had a couple of visits there in the last few months, so I think that's a welcome initiative. I'm sure that the Rossy Trust will welcome it, and it's good to hear that you're doing some good work there, because I think. I mean, there have been some issues at Rossy, and I think the more support that they get from organisations like yourself, I think that's very welcome. So I'd like to thank you for that parochially as a local member. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Boyd, do you want to make a comment on page 32?
Yes, please, Alec. Yeah, page 32. It was the Challenge Poverty Week. Very pleased but saddened in lots of ways to see that this has to be happening in Angus. Very sad to think there's over 300 people have visited over a 6-day period, which seem to be more than one in Kirriemuir, Arbroath, and so on. So, but good work to the local fire brigade there for doing it. And so, if you could pass back my thanks to them for all the hard work they put in, and I in turn will also thank the Carnoustie Golf Links, which of course are the town's registered charity, for generously donating the bags of groceries and free breakfast bags. But as I'm saying, the saddest thing of all is that we having to do this in a modern society.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Devine, you want a question on page 33?
No, not a question at all. No, I wanted to thank you. And I don't know whether it was your safety message going into schools or whether it was to do with your leaflets around businesses selling fireworks, but I certainly found the lead up to Bonfire Night a much quieter experience this year. So did my dog, actually. And Bonfire Night itself wasn't nearly so bad. So thank you for all the work that you've been involved with there. And I'd also like to say thanks for being so involved with the White Ribbon campaign. This is a very important campaign, and especially when an organisation like yourselves, which is predominantly men, get involved, it's really important that as individuals you call out misogynistic words and actions. So thank you for that. I do appreciate it.
Councillor Bell, is that a legacy hand? Okay, right. If there's no more questions in anything, do we agree the recommendations? Good, thank you very much. Just finish off by thanking you, Stephen and Scott, and your predecessors for the amount of effort and work you've put into keeping this committee busy over the past 5 years. Can I ask you, I normally ask you to stay till the end of the police report. I'm going to ask you to stay till the end of item 7, which is the Violence Against Women Partnership Annual Report. I think that there may be questions which you would want to answer in the Adult Protection Committee Annual Report and the Violence Against Women Partnership. So if you could just bear with us for an extra 2 items today, then we'll be, thank you very much. Right, can we move on to the Police and Fire Report, please, item 5.
Thanks, Convener, and good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all again. So for information, I'm joined again today by Chief Inspector Leanne Blacklaw, who is, as you know, is our local area commander for Angus. And in terms of the policing report today, I'll trust that members have had the opportunity to read the report and wouldn't intend to clearly go over it page by page. It's significant in detail, and I know you'll have had the chance to digest it. The report covers the performance update and the associated contextual information against the local policing plan and shows its linkages into our national policing objectives as well as into the Angus community plan. It covers the Q3 period, which, as we know, is the 1st of October through till the 31st of December. However, or the majority of the data within it is for the year to date, 1st of April until the 31st of December, and against the comparable period from the year before. As per the last quarter, I would again advise members that the impact of the coronavirus pandemic continues to make the year-on-year comparisons of data very challenging, because there was much greater and significant restrictions in place for the same reporting period of the year before. And Q3 this year also itself had a number of challenges with Omicron and a return to some restrictions in December. We know that it also included COP26, a significant national event, multi-agency responses to Bonfire Night, as has been touched upon there by my fire service colleagues, multi-agency responses to Storm Arwen, and that for policing, across all of that policing was much more aligned to pre-pandemic demands, with further increased road use, increased social interactions, a pretty much fully reopened licensed trade and wider commercial and local events activities, which in the round clearly leads to increased demand on services and an increase in associated offences. In terms of a brief summary of what is detailed in the quarter's performance report, I'm going to do similar to Stephen, and I'm going to hand over to Chief Inspector Blacklaw, who will lead in drawing out some of the key points from this quarter's report, and then I'm more than happy between the two of us, as usual, to take any questions that councillors may have. Thanks very much. Hand over to Leanne.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent. Thanks, Convener, and nice to see you all. Good afternoon. Okay, so I'll start off with page 40, which provides a summary of our performance. Starting with violent crime. Violent crime continues to be a priority for us in Angus. And after an unusual peak of robberies and serious assaults, which we saw in Q1, which still impacts on the increase we see today in Q3's report, the number of these incidents occurring in Q3 have stabilised to more normal levels. Although there's still an increase in the number of serious assaults in comparison to last year, this is still below the 5-year average and remains the lowest across Tayside Division. There's been no particular trend identified regarding the robberies and serious assaults, and a large number of these incidents involve people who have previously been known to each other before these incidents. Our colleagues in CID continue to review all instances of serious assault and robbery to ensure that all our investigative opportunities are maximised. Sadly, our emergency service assaults continue to show an increase, again in keeping with the national picture. Our emergency services assaults, I'll just point out, are also included in our common assaults total, albeit they're both listed separately. In addition to work that's ongoing nationally, we are doing work locally in Tayside to improve our understanding of this increase and to continue to increase the safety and, of course, the confidence of our officers for doing their jobs. Moving on to acquisitive crime, you'll have noticed an increase in all such crime types compared to last year, which again is in keeping with the pattern across Tayside Division. We're fully aware of the impact that these crime types have on our communities, on our people, and we're committed to preventing these crimes happening in the first place. However, when they do occur, we ensure that they're fully investigated to identify those people responsible and to bring offenders to justice. A large number of these inquiries are still ongoing, with forensic results outstanding, which can delay the detection for some of these crimes as we wait on these results of the analysis coming back to us. Moving on to road safety, tragically there's been one fatality in Angus this quarter, whereby a female pedestrian was struck by a vehicle and tragically died. The circumstances of this have been reported to the Procurator Fiscal for their review. Moving on to public protection, there's been an increase in the number of crimes recorded under our Domestic Abuse Scotland 2018 legislation, an increase of 10 crimes compared to last year. This is relatively new legislation, as we know, starting in 2018, therefore we don't have a 5-year comparison available. Of note, and a very positive welcome addition, we have 2 domestic abuse liaison officers who are now based and working from Angus in Angus. This has proved to be really successful so far, with these officers having regular contact with victims in Angus and also improving relations with our local officers. This contact brings an increase in trust with the people in our community and with our victims, and therefore has seen an increase in reporting. And although this can only be seen as positive, it ensures that we're sighted on the risk posed to these victims and allows us to have thorough safety planning, as well as ensuring that investigations are carried out and those people responsible are brought to justice. The level of recorded sexual crimes higher than our 5-year average, which again is in keeping with other areas in Tayside and nationally. A recent analysis has shown in Tayside that 28% of all Group 2 crimes and 53% of all rapes are non-recent in nature. In a number of cases, multiple reports have been raised in respect of one victim, and sometimes these offences have been committed over various and many years. In all cases reported that we see this time, the victim and perpetrator have been known to each other prior to the offence taking place. It's hoped that we can continue to encourage the reporting of sexual crime through increasing the confidence of victims and continuing to work closely with our partners to achieve this. Moving on into the key activity section, we've added a new section here which highlights the hugely important areas of policing that often go unseen. In this reporting quarter alone, officers in Angus have submitted 1,910 vulnerable person reports regarding vulnerable people in our community. These reports can be about children or vulnerable adults, and they're screened by our colleagues in the Risk and Concern Hub, who then appropriately share information with our partners to get the support to those who need it most. In November 2021, we saw the launch of the Non-Fatal Overdose Group in Angus. The multi-agency group meets twice a week to discuss individuals who've experienced an unintentional overdose and ensures a rapid response to those people with the purpose of preventing drug deaths. This is obviously really positive for Angus and really encouraging, and is a further example of the effective partnership working that we do. And Convener, that's me for my summary. If anybody has any questions for Chief Superintendent Davison or myself, then we'll gladly answer them.
Thank you, Leanne. Right, bids for questions. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Convener. Pages 55, 64 and 74, please.
55, 64, 74. Councillor Whiteside.
Thank you, Convener. Page 38, please.
Councillor Devine.
49 and 68, please.
Councillor Duff.
Page 55, Convener.
Councillor Laurie.
Page 68, Convener.
Anyone else? No. Right, let's start off with Councillor Whiteside on page 38.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you both for a full and very interesting report. I'm looking at the objectives on page 38, and I notice there's no specific category for rural crimes. And apologies if we've asked this before, but the reason I'm specifically raising it is following a community council meeting last week where the issue of rural crime was raised. There seemed to be a perception amongst some of the people that there wasn't enough rural crime officers or officers sent in response to rural crime with enough knowledge about things like sheep worrying, etc. And they were wondering how the police liaise with the dog wardens, for example, in instances like that. They were also felt that the police report that they get monthly is not very area specific, and I appreciate that part of it is a bit generic over a wider area, and then it concentrates on crimes in that specific area. But they were wondering if there could be a bit more of a rural focus on what I asked about was the casualties on rural roads. Do you see a pattern in the car accidents and casualties? Do they tend to be on rural roads more often, or trunk roads, or is it just very difficult to categorise where they happen?
Thanks, Councillor, for the question. Maybe just take that into two parts, if that's okay then. So just talk about your page 38 point around about the priorities first. So the priorities there are badged to cover the whole area of Angus, and that would be rural and urban areas. And certainly there will be activity within both rural and urban areas within each of those headings. So acquisitive crime, for example, covers break-ins to houses. Now that would be equally a priority for our more rural communities that become subject to and targeted by. And equally, when you look then at road safety, and road crime, we have as much attention to rural roads as we do to urban roads, and I would say the same across the other headings of the priorities that are there. I hope that gives some reassurance that rural is not discounted in our policing report, policing priorities at all. It is absolutely fully included within it. What I would say is the point there around about, I suppose, the local reporting is something I think we can take on. And just before I move on, I guess, to give an answer around about the casualties, I'll maybe ask Leanne if she's got any points just around about that local reporting that she maybe want to bring in.
Thanks, Chief Superintendent. In respect of the rural crime, obviously, as the Chief Super said, it does come under acquisitive crime. That actually is a large portion of our acquisitive crime and where our focus is. So we have been increasing our patrols in rural areas with a view to prevent and to identify those who are driving and often, as we've previously discussed, are crossing the border into Angus from other areas. So working along with our colleagues from Road Policing Unit as well to form that link and to increase our coverage in the rural areas. Sorry, Chief Super, were you wanting me to cover the road traffic accident part of it, or are we going back to you for that?
I'm easy either way, Leanne. I think the reality is that what we do, Councillor, for our roads is clearly we look at accident statistics, accident data, insurance bumps data. We look at our speed detection equipment that gives indications of speed in certain areas. Clearly, where we've got community concerns that are raised, it may be that it's speed detection, the signs that come up and give you an allocation of measurement that we'll put in first. Throughout all of that, where we end up prioritising our activities is then based on the collective of that data. In terms of injuries and accidents, that has a big feature in the deployments that we would put in place, the vast majority of which tend to be on our busier roads. As I'm sure you would appreciate, more vehicular traffic tends to lead to more bumps and accidents. But equally, the rural communities, which was the original point of your question, has some of our more challenging roads when speed and other intoxicants or otherwise is applied, and that clearly is the nature of windy B roads, windy A roads, and such like. So we absolutely, between our roads policing specialist officers and our local police officers, road safety is one of the priorities we've got. We're working with the fire service there through Stephen's input earlier on around about education prevention, but equally on our part in terms of detection, it's got that equitable focus in the areas that need it the most. I trust that helps.
Thanks, it is quite helpful. I suppose the only thing really I'm wondering about is specialist rural officers in relation to crimes involving animals, etc. Is there any, or is this just spread across all the officers in the area?
So what Police Scotland has is access to specialist officers, wildlife crime officers, and they are areas in which we get very specialist advice relative to specific rural crime. Within the division, we have access to trained wildlife officers who again, provide that expertise and advice. And otherwise, in terms of our broader cadre of officers through the training they get through Tully Allen, there's modules in the training programme that cover rural and wildlife crime. So each officer will have a familiarity with the most common types of legislation that they will come across. Each of our community officers will and should engage with the varying nature of their community. So if you're working in a more urban environment, you take more of a focus clearly on your retail and commercial sector perhaps that you're working with. And if you're working in a rural environment as a community officer, you take more of a focus in relation to farms, rural activities, and game, and we would link in with local partners associated in that respect. So I suppose just to give you that confidence that the focus is clearly tailoring local officer knowledge and awareness to their local communities, but where we come across something that's a bit more complex and specialist, that we've got expertise that we can tap into.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right, can we move on to page 49, Councillor Devine?
Thanks, Convener. It was under domestic housebreaking, but I think it probably refers to rural stuff as well. You mentioned that there's a number of repeat offenders, and I was wondering if that was more individuals or indeed gangs maybe coming into the area.
So it's actually a bit of both. We have professional criminals that have been travelling some distances to target essentially properties that they see as having a value, and that's not just across Angus, but it's across broader Tayside into Fife, into Aberdeenshire and wider afield. Police Scotland clearly does our own local investigation, but links very much in that cross-border space and ties together our intelligence so that we are aware of how those gangs are operating. And we've had some successful detections with perpetrators as far away as Leeds in some cases, and broader into Scotland. But equally, there are individuals within our communities that are repeat offenders, and clearly where we get a repeat offender, then certainly that is heavily highlighted in the reporting that we put into the Procurator Fiscal Service to make sure that that is clear. But equally, the intelligence we will have in terms of being able to be proactive around about individuals is something we're clearly aware of and focus on as well. And the broader piece beyond that, Councillor, is really around about the preventative space. And in that, we've a fair bit of activity to look at home safety measures, awareness for householders in relation to the protection of their property, and targeted and focused patrols. So whilst I think Leanne mentioned earlier on, there's no specific pattern to areas, but where we get a couple of acquisitive crimes in relatively close happening, then we'll have that increased focus activity and such like to we can get some reassurance into our communities. I don't know, Leanne, if you want to add anything further onto that.
Everything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bell, page 55.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you both for your report. I'm picking up on the issues around driver and road user behaviour. I feel I've been a bit of a frequent flyer emailing Craig Hudson over the last few months. I wanted to ask you specifically around the mention of vulnerable road users and your approach to dealing with these issues. What sort of proportion of situations are you able to deal with through encouragement perhaps to give up driving altogether before a tragedy occurs. In terms of that broader based approach, I think there's a lot that could be done there, and it would be good to get a sense of how effective that is at the moment. And also around the new driver scheme, just rolling over to the top of the next page, is that going to be mandatory for newly passed drivers, or how would they get onto that? Thank you both.
Thanks, Councillor Bell. Again, good question. And road safety, as has been mentioned, is an area of priority for us. I think there's a bit of follow-on to what Stephen Wood was talking about earlier on, and that connection into the information that we are aware of from looking at all of what we have relative to road crime and road safety, is that those that are become subject to accident, to injury or otherwise, is not necessarily just our young drivers, as maybe was an area of focus some time ago. And we do have vulnerable road users across a number of age groups into our elderly age group category who've maybe been not driving for some time, and the pandemic has had an impact too, where perhaps more experienced drivers have not been driving their car quite as often, and it does take a bit of time to get back behind the wheel. So it's a multifaceted approach is what is needed, and there's clearly work across multi-agencies and across the different categories of rider and driver. The report mentions that we will move into a focus with motorcycle drivers as we get nearer to the brighter lights season coming in. We'll be looking at travellers coming in to our communities for purposes of that. In working, for example, partner agencies, there is discussions that go on regularly in terms of, for example, our health colleagues, when we're looking at vulnerabilities, there's an onus across the multi-agency space to have that responsibility to look at that broader safety piece. So where we clearly have somebody that's eyesight, for example, may be deteriorating, then our opticians have a means in which to report to the DVLA. Is one means of looking in from that perspective. But broadly, our approach to driver behaviour has always been a one that touches on prevention, touches on intervention, touches on education. And when we come across people that are involved in bumps, are committing minor road traffic offences, there is that element of consideration across the piece with that, and each circumstance is clearly to its own merit. And is an educational word in the ear sufficient? Is a recommendation towards a course, for example, the new driver scheme, the most appropriate option, or is it enforcement action by means of a fixed penalty ticket or otherwise a report to the Procurator Fiscal? So I don't think it's easy to kind of give that there's a one-size-fits-all approach. It's very much an individual circumstance thing, and then looking at the collective set of data for where we need to focus on particular audiences in a particular way. And the new driver scheme, I don't actually have the answer to whether it'll be mandatory or not. I don't know if Chief Inspector Blacklaw does, but either way, it will be clearly focused at our new drivers and really trying to encourage the dangers that there are out there. Leanne,
train that will target groups of youths through various groups that they attend, etc. But I'll certainly confirm that. I'll double check as it is new, and I'll come back to you.
Thank you. Right, next one is it's Councillor Duff on the same page, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yeah, I just wanted to raise something that came up at a couple of community councils that I attend in the last month or so. and that's the vexed question of 20-mile-per-hour speed zones. Now, these were introduced, as you're aware, by the council some time ago, and I think there was a police sergeant at one of the meetings, and I think the community council members were perhaps expecting a kind of zero tolerance approach from the police for anything that's going above 20, and I think he tried. The sergeant did a good job in trying to explain the police position, but I think it would be quite good to give both of you an opportunity just to articulate what your current attitude is, because I think there is, people are perhaps wrongly criticising the police here, and you maybe give you a chance to explain your current strategy on speeding.
Thanks for that, Councillor. Certainly aware of some concerns raised in some of our communities around about the 20-mile-per-hour limits and drivers not abiding by them. In general, Police Scotland don't routinely enforce the 20-mile-per-hour limits unless they're outside schools or unless there's a specific need because of for casualty reduction. However, along with our colleagues in our road policing department, we continue to carry out patrols and improve driver and road user behaviour through that sort of positive engagement and of course enforcement where it's required. I think what is key to understand is the data around about injury, accidents and otherwise does not highlight a major concern on the 20-mile-per-hour roads as it does in some of the other roads that we have. So we always need to take a focused and prioritised approach to where we deploy our assets to make sure that they are in the areas of the greatest priority and concern. So I am not in any way saying we are not targeting 20-mile-per-hour zones. It is that we would be taking a focused approach to that. And clearly, if our communities have a concern of certain areas, I would encourage them to report them in to us. There are, I guess, staged and incremental approaches we can take. So we can work with council colleagues and look at those, speed detection or speed awareness raising monitoring equipment in the first instance, perhaps. And then to clearly escalate up if there's continued challenges. And certainly, as I've mentioned already, where we would more often focus if we were in the 20-mile-per-hour zones would be around about schools or areas where we've got a clear need to do so because there's been accidents or otherwise that are leading us into that state. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks. That's a helpful answer. And I know my first port of call if I get complaints of speeding is to get the council's roads team to do some monitoring, so at least we've got some data. So and they obviously share that with yourselves. So I think thanks for that response.
Great.
Thank you, Councillor Bell, page 64.
Yeah, thank you. Very pleased to see 100% detection rates and racially aggravated crime. I wondered what you had planned for Hate Crime Awareness Week this month. If there's going to be, is it a National Police Scotland campaign, or is each area division going to be doing its own thing to tweak to its communities? Thanks.
So it's a bit of both, Councillor. Thanks for the question. So Police Scotland will clearly have a national focus and campaigns that will come out that will be cascaded out through all areas of policing, in which we will look to have those consistent and same messages on that national basis, and they will be pushed out in the sort of the usual fashion, in similar fashion to how we've pushed out the That Guy campaign and the other national campaigns that we've been involved in recently. And then clearly there's opportunity on a more local basis for us to work with partners and explore any additional local activities that we may wish to undertake. I'm not sure, Leanne, whether that's come up in discussion as yet in relation to Angus locally, but if not, I would imagine it'd be something we can certainly have conversations on and come back on.
There's early discussions with our colleagues in partnerships, interventions and preventions who do a lot of work in this space. So we will, along our community officers, join in with them and for the local aspect of that.
Okay. All right, Councillor Laurie, page 68.
Yep, thank you, Convener. Last year, the Lord Advocate announced the extension of the recorded police warning guidelines to allow diversion from prosecution for those caught in possession of Class A drugs. Now, this is a welcome move. I really do believe that criminal charges for possession don't make anybody safer, and the misuse of drugs should be treated as a health issue and not a criminal one. So my question is, are police officers in Angus making use of these new discretionary powers and issuing police warnings for simple possession offences?
Thanks, Councillor. So agreed and very much supportive. First of all, Police Scotland looks to adopt a health-led and collaborative approach to clearly tackle the challenges related to drug use and abuse. And I think the example referred to earlier on around about the non-fatal overdose group and the carriage of naloxone, which was successfully piloted in Dundee and has now been rolled out wider, are examples of that. The bringing in of the recorded police warnings option was certainly welcomed by ourselves, and it allows that additional use of discretion in the same way that I've probably just explained our approach to roads as well, and it's where the circumstance fits, and clearly where we can also signpost people involved to additional support services, and there'll be clearly people that the application of a recorded police warning, though, is not applicable to, and they would be, repeat offenders and so on. In terms of the specific figures for Angus, I don't know, Leanne, whether you would have that. I do know that our officers across Tayside have used the new recorded police warnings, Councillor, which is positive, and it's exactly what I would expect. I just don't have the statistical breakdown, but I'll just see if Leanne does. If not, it's something we can come back to you with.
I don't have that to hand, but it's certainly something I can look into and get.
Okay. Councillor Devine, same page.
Yes, it's kind of following on from that, and while I agree with what you've said in terms of possession, I am still quite concerned about the number of people who are dealing drugs in some of our areas. I hope that with the antisocial behaviour strategy that we've now got, and there'll be even better partnership working across council and police, that this will help the situation, because I'm sure you know that within our own areas, our communities, people can identify the very houses where there is this activity going on, and it has huge implications for the whole community. Quite a lot of fear is involved in that. So I just wondered if you could make some comments on that for me, please.
Yeah, so I think thanks for the question, Councillor. It's a really good and pertinent question. The impact of drugs clearly cuts across every aspect of this policing report, and the same way that alcohol does. It has a part to play in domestic violence, in sexual offences, in violent crime, in acquisitive crime, and we've also got then the concerns of the unfortunate deaths that we have that occur because of drug use. So the picture, whilst I describe it as very much a health-led one that policing is now looking to focus on, I think is the right way to approach this, that we need to try and look at the whole societal picture, and targeting that health-led way is the way to longer-term success. So policing very much on that journey with our multi-agency partners, clearly, and that is absolutely right. But equally, we have a responsibility to target those that would wish to profiteer from drugs and cause harm to others by that supply and harm to others, and how they would exploit others in that chain of supply as well. So whilst we are certainly looking at that health-led approach, our targeting of those that wish to profit, those involved in organised crime, those involved in supply, remains unwavering and is an area of focus. And I think that's shown by the 63% increase in the volume of drug supply cases that we've had this year. That is evidence very much in itself of that continued focus. And that focus comes about through some really good information and intelligence we get from the public. And I would thank our communities for that. And as you describe, those that know households, know persons, knows those that are involved in that activity. And I would just encourage that continued reporting comes in, because we are very much and will continue to target those that continue to try and take advantage of others.
Thank you. I do encourage people to report everything, so that you've got a log of all of it.
And finally, Councillor Bell, page 74.
Yeah, thank you very much, Convener. The missing persons concerns and assistance incidents are just concerning, and I think anyone who's on social media these days will see quite often there are missing person reports. I'm just wondering to what extent that can sometimes be a hindrance as well as being a help, and what safeguards are in place in the situations where someone's trying to evade a difficult and dangerous situation.
Yeah, so I think, thanks for the question. I think if I've picked it up correctly, any report of vulnerability that comes into police gets assessed across a number of information feeds, and certainly where we have a circumstance that leads to a missing persons report, we would be looking to assess or risk assess that missing person based on that plethora of information. So we will clearly get information from a person reporting a loved one missing or relative missing, but we will also get information from other parties. Now, that may be through door-to-door inquiries, where they live, contact with employers. It may be contact with, well, it will definitely be contact with our multi-agency partners, and it'll certainly look at and consider our own policing systems and ongoing caseloads. So if there are or has been subject of concern and subject of agency working, then the full consideration in the round is applied into that, and that would certainly direct how the police would then coordinate that inquiry, and certainly would be of a main consideration on the tracing of an individual in that circumstance, because we clearly do not want to place anybody in risk and potential harm. Is that hopefully answered? I think that was how your question was framed.
Okay. Right, that's finished with that. Do we agree the recommendations? Agreed. Thank you. Again, Chief Superintendent, normally we let you go at this point, but I would prefer the police to stay for items 6 and 7, the Adult Protection Committee annual report and the Angus Violence Against Women Partnerships annual report, just in case there's things that comes up in questioning which are better targeted towards you rather than officers. Right, can we go on to item 6, which is the Angus Adult Protection Committee annual report, starting on page 78. Can I ask Mrs. Williamson to do the initial introductions? I have no doubt that Mr. West or Catherine Lindsay will take the detail, but we could ask Mrs. Williamson just to start us off.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Good afternoon, members. It's apt that this report follows on from the police report, I think. Before you've got the annual report, which has been approved by the Adult Protection Committee on the 8th of December, and the Chief Officers Group, which I sit on the 24th of January. A couple of things I want to pick out for you before I hand over to Ewan West. Totally grateful for the work that Ewan does as our chair, both of the Adult Protection Committee, but also the Violence Against Women Partnership, which we're coming on to at the next report. It's important, I think, for members to note that there's been a significant increase in adult protection activity over 2020-2021. I mean, 79%. Now, that's from a consistent average of about 400 referrals to 728. It's also worth pointing out that referrals have been growing from family and friends, which we take in many regards as a positive, because we're obviously getting our signposting right and people knowing where to go and how to refer. So it's getting clearer for the public. We're also noticing an increase in referrals of people presenting with mental health difficulties. There are a number of areas for improvement. I want to pick out a couple of them, and no doubt Ewan will pick out some more. One of these is learning from our initial case reviews, and the other are significant case reviews, one such as you heard about last committee. And secondly, one that we're actively working on is engaging and listening to those with lived experience. So as well as having police here, we do have Ewan West, there's George Bowie from the Health and Social Care Partnership, Catherine Lindsay, who's the Chief Social Work Officer, and we're all happy to answer any questions members may have.
Okay. Shall we just proceed to questions, Councillor Bell?
Thank you. It's not relating to a page in particular, but a question around mental health for the police.
Okay. Councillor Devine?
Thanks, Convener. Pages 92, 99, 108 and 111.
Okay. Councillor Whiteside?
Thanks, Convener. Pages 78 and 89.
Right. Okay. Councillor Bell, can we have you on the mental health?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Appreciated. Now that we've got a 7-day-a-week community-based mental health service, I'm just wondering if the police are finding that helpful in terms of how they deal with people who are perhaps in a crisis, and is that helping you to avoid taking them to Carsview and allowing them to be kept at home?
Councillor, the short answer is yes. We've had some really good success with the Nuke, which is now gone 24/7 in Perth and Kinross area, which is providing that community-based support. That's been a resounding success and has undoubtedly taken away demand on frontline policing services and allowed members of the community to get the right support from the right agency at the earliest opportunity, and certainly taking away that downstream demand. As we've looked to roll out those similar ventures into Dundee and then into Angus, we are starting to see the similar sort of benefits. So really welcome and appreciative of the partnership support around about that.
Convener, sorry to interrupt. I wondered if you would like to hear from the chair of the committee before you take Councillor Devine's questions.
Yes, well, I thought that I was going to get a presentation from Mr. West. That's why when he didn't come in, I went to questions. Mr. West.
Yes, good afternoon, Convener. Good afternoon, councillors. Yeah, I mean, Williamson's covered some of the highlight reports, highlight points in the report. I think it is worth dwelling on referrals that have quite considerably increased this year, or for the reporting period, going from 406 to 728. And I think there are positives in that. I think it would indicate that some of our public information messages about people reporting and how they can report about vulnerable people are achieving some success. Also put that down to the work of committee members, and not just because they're sitting on this group today, but if you look at the fire and rescue numbers of referrals, which have gone up remarkably from 26 to 53, and a lot of that, the comment perhaps, but is around self-neglect and hoarding when they're going into various houses
and seeing fire risks, reporting those in, not just exclusively that type of reporting, but certainly when they're going in there and there clearly are issues, then they're being reported in as referrals, and then we can get a full multi-agency response to dealing with the issues and hopefully prevent any fire tragedies or casualties. And so it's the work of the committee and the representatives on the committee that take the messages back out to the workforce that have seen that increase in referrals, and it's very much welcomed. Friend and neighbour, I think, there's gone up considerably, so hopefully that message is getting out there. Clearly the bulk of the referrals come from the police, and we've already heard how the referrals go in through the Risk and Concern Hub and are sifted and then passed out. So I think it is a big increase. Obviously that increase does not come without additional work and investigation and inquiry, and we're indebted to the people on the front line who do that work and bring these cases to hopefully a satisfactory conclusion. As Mrs. Williamson highlighted, we've had one or two very high-profile reviews that we've done, and we absolutely need, everyone needs to learn the lessons. It's also worth balancing up those against the vast majority of other cases that are reported regarding a range of vulnerabilities, where very successfully people are assisted, supported across various different types of abuse, shall we say, and hopefully their life experience after that is much better than it was when they unfortunately had to come into the system. So there's lots of good work happening out there. You'll see in the report there's reference to, for example, financial abuse. And certainly in Angus, I know from speaking to national colleagues that the response in Angus is first class in terms of vulnerable people who have been, for want of a better word, scammed, or somebody's attempting to scam them. We have a very rapid reaction group who look at those almost the same day, if not the next day. The banks in Angus are tremendously supportive of that work and link in with the police, trading standards and others to have some pretty early preventative work there. And I know that we get reports from the police and the interventions that they've made have prevented a lot of people losing a lot of money. It's clearly very important. So I think there's lots of positives, but that does not mean that we should not continue, and the committee does continue to have a focus on self-evaluation and review, and we now have a self-evaluation subgroup which is tasked with conducting more of that type of work than we've probably previously done, because it's important to identify good practice and disseminate good practice, as well as to pick up on areas where we can improve, whether it's around training or whatever it may be. And just on that point, I'll finish, Convener. We now have a very extensive training framework, which offers a range of different training opportunities to make sure that those on the front line are appropriately skilled for the work that they are undertaking. And there was a couple of recommendations from reviews around training and extending not just the level but the variety of training to frontline staff. So I'm pleased to say that that has progressed. And the final point that Mrs. Williamson made was around service users. Coming to the next committee is a service user strategy in which independent advocacy have been leading on it for us, and I look forward to receiving that and developing the input that service users can have when we determine future priorities and strategy going forward. So I'll maybe pause at that, Convener, and happy to take any further questions.
Thank you, Mr. West. Councillor Whiteside, page 78.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks for the report. It's covering a really hugely important piece of work. I was just a little bit of confusion around the dates and types of reports. The biennial report, which presumably is for every other year, it says it's from April 18 to March 19, and then we've got a gap here, and then this annual report. I'm just wondering if there's mistakes with the dates, or whether there is a year missed out, and how does the annual report tie in with the biennial report? Also, I know there's a lot of work goes into producing these reports, but it would be really helpful if we got it a little bit closer to the end of the reporting period. I don't know if that is at all possible, but when it's almost a year later, I'm sure some of the important information's changed quite a lot, particularly in terms of the case review, for example. But if you could clear up the confusion about the dates, that would be excellent.
Mr. West, is that you?
Yeah, I think it should be to March 20, Councillor, instead of March 19. So that's obviously
that's a typo.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, thank you.
How the annual report links in with the biennial report. The biennial report is a report that we must submit to Scottish Government, and we don't actually, there's no legislative requirement for us to produce an annual report, but since I've been the chair, I feel it's important to produce that. So that, I think 2 years is too long to go without a report, to be honest. In terms of the reporting periods, if you want it sooner, then we could potentially try to do that. We've worked to the reporting periods we've been asked to work to, but that's maybe something we can have some further discussion around. But I do take your point that there are, since a year's gone past, things have changed, undoubtedly.
Thank you. Councillor Whiteside again, page 89.
Thank you. This is just another question about the wording. The wording at the bottom, just underneath the tables, about NFA 3 and 4. I'm a bit confused about the difference between NFA 3 and 4, and hoping you can explain that for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm on a different. Can you just?
Page 9.
Right, thank you.
Convener, I'm wondering whether or not Mr. Bowie might be better placed to respond to that, as it relates directly to social work practice within.
Okay, if Mr. Bowie is available, would you like to pick that up?
Yes, I'm struggling actually to remember myself what distinction was. I'm sorry.
Well, that says no further action because the adult lives outside of Angus Council. And NF4 is no further action because the adult lives out with Angus.
So certainly the first one, we could commence an investigation, then find that we do not have legal powers to intervene if somebody is not within our area, which is the Angus Council geographical boundary. So I'm quite clear what number 3 means, but I cannot remember what the distinction is for number 4. I'm sorry, but I can come back with that information.
If you would, please, Mr. Bowie. Right. Councillor Devine, page 92.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much both for the report, and Ewan, I'd really like to commend you for the huge amount of work you do on an ongoing basis along with your committee. But I need a bit of clarification too. It's on page 92, that's 12 on your paper. The graph, I'm looking at telling me that the referrals leading to an inquiry are at 95%, which has gone up from 71%. The text underneath says that it's gone down. They have fallen consistently. Now, I'm not sure which is right. Is it the text that's right that although there are lots more referrals, fewer are going to inquiry? And therefore, should the graph be different? Sorry, it's a bit technical.
No, it's actually a very good point, actually. I think that is not right. As you can see from the figures are correct, that the percentage of referrals going to inquiry has increased. over that 4-year period.
Right.
Let me have a look at that, Councillor. I'll come back to you directly with an answer on that one.
Thank you.
If you
Thank
don't mind.
Yeah.
And still with you, Councillor Devine, page 99.
Yes, this was just about this huge leap from 8% to 24% for those aged 50 to 64 with age of adults at risk. Now, you're mentioning underneath about substance use, and I do recognise that a lot of people who have been using substances are getting older, but why is there that huge? Have you been able to analyse that leap?
That's your page 19, Mr. West.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I think the short answer to that, Councillor Devine, is we don't know. I think there was some speculation that it could be around to substance misuse for the reasons you've just said. I think potentially, and again, I'm thinking there may be some impact on mental health around that. It's difficult to say, but I could ask Mr. Bowie and his team to have a closer look at that and see if we can get a bit more definitive information. But it's a difficult one to answer right now. But yeah, it is surprising that there has been an increase in that age bracket. I would expect it not to be, but it might be just down to a particular set of circumstances over a number of. I mean, it's not a massive sample size, but we can have a look at that. Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Bowie, you stuck your hand up to come in there.
Yes, thanks, convener. We couldn't say definitively, Councillor Devine, but I've got a view on it. I think the proportion of people at risk of harm who are suffering from financial abuse, and that tends to be the much older group that are manipulated in that way, has probably come down as a proportion of the total. And the proportion of folk with mental health problems, substance misuse, and I think people with disabilities has probably gone up as a proportion of the total. But I couldn't say absolutely definitively, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case.
Yeah. Thanks. Don't worry about that. I mean, it just stood out for me, that leap there.
Right, still with you, Councillor Devine, page 108. That's page 20, I think, or 28 perhaps.
28, I think, yeah. Actually, I was going to ask about the server user involvement and participation, but I won't now because that's been answered. And it's Mr. Bowie, really. The transitions, I know that this is going forward and I know it's a priority, but it's quite a long time since this report was written. So has there been quite a bit of progress? Because it's been a difficult one, this one, over quite a long time, doing the transitions between children's services and adult services.
Yeah, that remains an area of concern for us. We know that young people, especially those coming out of the care system, have got much greater levels of vulnerability than people who have not been within the care system of the same kind of age range, between 16 and early 20s, because of the experiences that people have had before they became looked after. So early impact of childhood trauma, abusive experiences, exposure to parental substance misuse or parental mental health, for example, or indeed direct experiences of abuse themselves. And many have had pretty disrupted relationships with caregivers. So we know that group's highly vulnerable, often experience mental health problems, commit offences, are offended against themselves. And that is the group that is our priority group within the transitions work. We have been doing a lot of work examining our current position and ability to meet need and identifying where our gaps are, and that work's coming to a bit of a conclusion, with probably a few more months' work to do to finish that off before we roll that. There's a number of short life working groups feeding into that, and we'll put all that together into an action plan. I would say COVID has disrupted that work, probably set us back about a year. So we did have a meeting very recently. We're trying to get momentum going on that again, but we are a bit behind where we would have liked to have been with it. But we are progressing. Yeah.
And finally, Councillor Devine, page 111. That's page 31.
This is probably just a bit of a cheeky one, really, but under governance, elected members aren't mentioned. Scrutiny and Audit Committee is not mentioned. Are we looked on as governance or not?
Would you like me to give an opinion on that?
Actually, I think it's more one for the Chief Executive.
Possibly, yes.
I mean,
Do you want me to answer that?
I said in the governance, if we're not listed, why is it coming to us?
My apologies. We'll put Scrutiny and Audit Committee in because you always do such a good job of scrutinising.
Yeah, but I ain't going to be here any longer.
We'll find you.
Of course you. Right. You pick that up and check that out, please, Margot.
Will do.
Where the council should be sitting in amongst that.
Certainly.
Right. Thank you very much. If that's us on item 6, there are recommendations which are specific to scrutiny and audit. Do we agree them? Agreed. Thank you.
Agreed.
Item 7. Mrs. Williamson, please, to introduce. I expect Mr. West will then want to come in.
Yeah, and I don't want to steal Ewan's thunder on this. I think I've picked up some of the things that he was going to say. So I'll just introduce the report as it is really, and just advise members it will also go to Council on the 10th of March. As I said at the last report, Ewan very kindly has taken over as the first independent chair of Violence Against Women Partnership, and we're seeing the benefits of that already. So I'll just hand over to him and then we'll go to questions, I think. I think that would be more appropriate.
Right, thank you. Mr. West.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Mrs. Williamson. Yeah, lots happened over the last year since I've taken on the chair, and I think the committee who represent the various agencies are showing a real commitment to taking this agenda forward across Angus. This is the first annual report that's been presented, and I felt as a chair that we needed to highlight key issues and challenges to chief officers as well as councillors, and I didn't feel it was appropriate not to have an annual report. So very welcome to get feedback on whether it meets your needs or not going forward. Some things that I've wanted to see progress, and we are progressing them now, is we need to have better data. Without proper data collection and interrogation of that information, it doesn't help when we're trying to set priorities for going forward, whether that be preventative, whether it's about involving service users, whether it's about communication. We need to get more information. So we're well on the way to having a data set, and certainly we'll be able to do some comparative data when we produce the report next year, and I think that will be important for us all. In terms of training, we've had to, because of COVID, we've had to digitalise quite a bit of our resources for training. That's been done successfully, and I'm very happy with that. We've produced a multi-agency good practice guidance for frontline workers in relation to domestic abuse, which has received we've received very positive comment around that, and we continue to promote Safe and Together. We continue to promote what I consider to be the most important aspect of gender-based violence, and that is prevention. The only way, in my view, and I think the committee's view, is if we're going to reduce, we need to prevent, and obviously there will be matters that will move to investigation, and incidents happen, but we need to prevent, and we need to prevent at the right times, and that means at early age. We need to influence the behaviour of men and boys much more than we've been doing, than nationally, but I'm more concerned with locally, and a lot of our discussion is around how we can develop this across Angus. So for the immediate future, that's a key activity. The data set's key activity, and making sure, as I said earlier, in terms of adult protection, that the professionals out there, whether they be in the agencies represented here today or in our more specialist agencies, have the knowledge and training to go out there and deliver and support victims. And just one other area I would want to touch on, Convener, before we move on to questions, is gender-based violence covers obviously the whole range of different criminality, perhaps. And one of the key things there is online abuse. And I don't feel that we really have a clear picture in Angus as to the extent of that and the impact that has on youngsters and others. So I've asked at the last meeting for a piece of work to be established to see if we can get a baseline as to where we are and what we need to do about it in terms of prevention. And I'm sure you'll all be aware that some of this online stuff starts with what can be termed as fairly innocent, sending a photograph of somebody, and then that progresses to something else, and then before you know it, people are trapped in that sort of circle of criminality, because it is criminality, because people are getting abused and exposed, and photographs are getting shared on internets and all sorts of issues, and that has a massive impact on the well-being of people and their mental health. So that's a focus that we need to have going forward over the next 12 months. But other than that, I'll happy to take any questions, as I'm sure others will be able to answer that are on the call.
Councillor Bell.
Pages 131 and 160, please, Convener.
Councillor Whiteside.
Page 143, 144.
Okay. Councillor Devine.
Page 132, 137, 144, maybe.
Okay, right. Councillor Bell, page 131.
Okay, thank you very much, Convener. I do have a question, and I've given the Convener a heads up that I'd like to say a few words before I get to that. I think today is a really important milestone for the Angus Violence Against Women Partnership. It's absolutely vital for us as elected members to see and scrutinise the detail and the extent of issues across Angus and how we're working in partnership to address them. Ewan, I'm really grateful to you as chair and all the partner constituent members for your efforts in pulling this annual report together, so that over time we can see how we're progressing in relation to the Equally Safe strategy and Safe and Together. The scale of violence against women in Angus is shameful. It's really distressing to read, but we have a baseline here that will allow us to improve and to tackle these issues, and as Ewan says, to prevent them. A 4% increase in domestic abuse across Scotland is really concerning, with 62,907 incidents recorded by Police Scotland in that time frame. So during our 16 days of action against violence against women last year, one elected member said he'd never seen any domestic violence in his caseload in all his time as a councillor. That will be because women will carefully choose to whom we disclose. We need to offer choice to women about where we seek support, that absolutely everyone is entitled to that support and will be heard when they disclose. And that's why our partnership approach is so important. We need to build trust, and building relationships is absolutely key. To remember that domestic abuse and violence against women can happen to anyone, regardless of their status. And we absolutely need to engage with parents, boys and men to teach healthy, respectful relationships. Ewan's absolutely right on that score. So I'm really grateful that this council and our officers took on board the gender-based motion I brought to council in 2018. And I draw your attention to the achievements that have been delivered and are being progressed by working in partnership across all these agencies. I'm also aware we do still have a way to go. This report to committee is therefore incredibly important to allow us to monitor progress. I'm so grateful to everyone concerned for keeping this heartbreaking, damaging and gendered societal issue on our agenda. I can't thank you enough for recognising the importance of it. So my question, just touching on the COVID section, Ewan, I know it's too early to have data within this reporting period, but I wondered if you had any kind of anecdotal an anecdotal picture around any increase in scale there, and if there are data gaps, might there be something that Public Health Scotland can do as well to deliver some local detail for you on that? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. During the period of the pandemic, I had a weekly meeting with senior representatives of the committee to try and keep a handle on, how many was there an increased reporting of domestic violence incidents or otherwise. And initially there wasn't, and then there was a small increase, and then that leveled out again. And I think everyone thought that after lockdown, after the initial lockdown and then the second lockdown, there would be an increase in reporting when people had a bit more freedom to perhaps go and meet agencies or whatever away from perpetrators. I'm not really seeing that coming through in the data that I've seen so far. Having said that, the levels, as you said there, of reported cases are still unacceptable. So we're going from a reasonably high baseline now, but I don't think that baseline's increased too much. And the figures in the report showed that in the 63 weeks since the 16th of April, Angus had shown a 7% reduction. I think that has slowed down a bit now, and the most recent figures I've seen is that we're about level with where we were at this time last year. So the reductions kind of tailed off slightly, but we're not having an increase. It doesn't seem to be increasing in terms of those figures. But yeah, I think there was an expectation it would go up, Councillor, but I don't think it's gone up quite as much as some people anticipate.
Thank you. Councillor Devine, page 132.
Yes, I'm just looking at the very end of that that quite long paragraph unit, and talking about the perpetrator helpline, which was set up and which got no calls. So we definitely do have a way to go. I'm just wondering how that is going to be publicised. I mean, I'm hoping, I was speaking earlier about the White Ribbon campaign, and I'm hoping that that is going to help. I hope that men are going to start to call out men, but hopefully signpost them. Now, what I would like to ask is, do you think there is a method of signposting men to that helpline? Because it seems one of the ways forward. I accept what you say about working with boys, working with young men, but we do have to work with perpetrators as well.
Yeah, I think that's a massive challenge, Councillor, to be honest. I mean, absolutely we'll signpost that during activity we have with men and boys going forward. I'm not, from a personal point of view, I'm not massively convinced about a phone line. I think it's a big thing for somebody to pick up a phone, and whether they're a perpetrator or they think they've got issues that they might become a perpetrator, or to someone phone up about a perpetrator. I would rather that we were able to signpost them to some of our agencies who can speak to them directly. I mean, somebody phoning in is really not going to give us all the information we want. And is it true, the information? What's, can we rely upon it? And these are always questions we have. I would rather they were able to speak to professionals or some of the people in our specialist agencies. And I think in future, that's the route I like to see us going down. But I think that needs a wee bit more work yet. It would be interesting, for example, I think we're trying to arrange a an event in Arbroath later this month, actually, for men and boys, which has come out of something else. And I think that'll be worthy of one of the questions. How would people like to be able to report and discuss these types of different types of gender-based violence? And it's kind of like going back to the service user in terms of adult protection, get some feedback from people who are experiencing this or who have got information. How would it best suit them to be able to provide that information? I think we've got a bit to go in that, Councillor, to be honest. I think that's not a position we want to be in going forward. We need to get better.
Yeah. Catherine Lindsay, come in.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to add really to the comments that Mr West had made there. Whilst we didn't receive calls to the perpetrator helpline, there have been instances, individual cases where perpetrators have been offered non-compulsory engagement and support to change behaviours and have accepted that from professionals within the Children, Families and Justice Directorate as part of the behaviour coming to light through different ways. So whilst the phone call route hasn't had the desired impact, there are certainly a growth in the range of supports that are available for perpetrators who are coming to our attention in different ways. And we'll continue to offer that and to grow it where we can.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Devine, page 137.
Oh, yes, I was just wondering, again, because this report's quite old, I suppose, but when businesses have been approached about the pledge, I wondered what the reactions have been. Are you hopeful that a lot of them are going to take this on board?
Well, that matter was actually discussed at the committee a couple of weeks ago, Councillor, because the take-up was not great initially. However, I've asked for a complete refocus on that and how we actually tried to deliver that message into businesses. I think the whole agenda of gender-based violence has moved on significantly, even in the last year, since the initial approaches were done to businesses. And I think we need to capitalise on that in terms of getting businesses to engage in terms of the pledge and what they can do about it. So very much a current issue for me and for the committee, and hopefully when we report back next, we'll have some better progress to report on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, next one is Councillor Whiteside, page 143.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks for the report. A lot of hugely important material in there. I was a little bit concerned about the last sentence on page 143 and going into the first area on 144. The strategy for working with boys and men was on hold, and it also appears again on page 153 in the weaknesses. There's been minimal engagement with men and boys. It just seems to me like working with men and boys should surely be front and centre for the Violence Against Women partnership, and I'm wondering if there's been any progress since the date that the report was came up to.
You're quite right in raising that as a point, and I'll be careful on my choice of words here, but previously men and boys didn't seem to be a priority for the partnership in terms of interaction. I've taken a different view on that, and that it absolutely must be for the reasons we've already said. And so that's why there is a change now, Councillor, than what was for the period that this report was covering. So please be assured that through White Ribbon and various other preventative initiatives that we'll be taking, that men and boys will be absolutely at the forefront of it, and were during our 16 days of action recently.
Thanks, that's really reassuring you, and thank you.
Okay, I take it that was page 144 as well, Councillor Whiteside. Councillor Devine, you had a tentative page 144.
Yeah, I don't need to.
You don't need to now.
No.
Right, Councillor Braze, you're a latecomer to the party. Do you have a question?
Convener.
Right, carry on, Councillor Braze.
Yes, well, you know, I'm really pleased to see this starting to happen now, and thank you very much, Ewan, for your efforts here. Of course, the big problem is men and boys, and obviously they have to be a big part of the solution as well. And I take responsibility for playing a role in that. I was a participant in the White Ribbon campaign because I really believe in this, and not least of all because I have a partner who is female and a daughter who is female, and it's really important that we start to move forward and get to the root of the problem, which is men and boys. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bell, you've spoken already.
I had a question on page 161.
I beg your pardon, so you did, page 161, 160, that's right, I beg your pardon.
Thank you, although the last few comments are indeed music to my ears. Yeah, on page 161, sections 1.4 to 1.3, it talks about high quality evidence-based non-court mandated programmes. And I guess my question comes from, you know, recent high profile football related incidents and campaigns. At what point can someone be determined to have successfully gone through one of these programmes? And I fully appreciate that will be different for everyone, but what sort of outcomes are you looking for? What sort of risk management is undertaken on that to say that has been a successfully completed course for that individual? Thank you.
Catherine Lindsay's wanting to come in, Ewan, if you want to let her answer that.
Absolutely.
Catherine?
So our justice services run a number of evidence-based programmes, and a number of those are mandated by the court, some are not. And the indicators for successful completion are that somebody makes it through the programme having addressed all the aspects of the programme and having participated meaningfully in the assessment of the professionals who are running the programme. We would also at the same time be looking at their overall risk assessment, which includes a whole range of factors that are not specifically addressed by the programme, which are more about their social economic circumstances and other forms of pressure and indicators of risk. So it's quite a dynamic approach, Councillor Bell, and I guess that, well, I don't guess, I know that completing a programme successfully does not necessarily mean that change has been achieved. And that's one of the reasons why the follow-up statistics around reconviction, for example, that are collated at a national level, always happen on the basis of a cohort over 5 years. Because actually reoffending it is not captured properly. Reconviction is what's captured, and we know that obviously in relation to violence against women and girls, reconviction is not necessarily that easy to come by. So those statistics are likely to underrepresent the true reoffending rates in this particular category. So that's why the delivery of high quality evidence-based programmes is only one facet of what we offer in terms of trying to move this issue on for some individuals. It's just part of an overall package. It's not the answer. And I think we must keep that front and central. Good quality programmes are important because they will support change for those individuals who are ready to change and who are amenable to change. And part of the skill of the people who are assessing suitability for programmes and reporting back to the court in cases where people are not complying is making judgments about whether or not compliance and completion really is about having changed culture, behaviours and attitudes, and whether that's likely to remain the case going forward or not. And these are not exact sciences. It is about individual judgment and, of course, dealing with human beings. You are always dealing with facets of behaviour that you're not fully sighted on. So I hope that gives you some sort of response and I guess some comfort that we're not putting all our eggs in this particular basket. Thank you.
Thank you. I take it we're now finished with item 7. There are specific recommendations for the Scrutiny and Audit Committee. Do we agree those recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you for the forbearance of police, fire, and all the officers that were involved with items 7 and 8. I think it's now time to say you can go. I would say also those that are here specifically for items 7 and 8, if they have no further business, I think it's time that they could go. The rest of us will plug on with the rest of the agenda. Thank you very much, everyone. Right, on to item 8, which is the Angus Alive Annual Report. And I think this is Kirsty Hunter, supported by Gordon Cargill.
Thank you, Convener, and delighted to be able to report for 2020-21 to members of the committee today. Our priority, as you'll have been aware from the Angus Alive update reports that have been presented to a number of council meetings over the past year and a half, has been on responsible stewardship of the charity throughout a very difficult time for the nation and also for the County of Angus locally. You'll have seen the information that's presented in the report, but I'm also pleased to be able to confirm that our accounts for 2020-21 were able to be prepared on a going concern basis, and that our external auditors gave an unqualified opinion and confirmed that there were no significant findings when they undertook their external audit of our accounts for that period. I think it's important at this point to note that the Council's commitment to ongoing payment of the management fee throughout this period, and in particular for the year 2020-21, which we're looking at under today's report, was absolutely critical in ensuring that we were able to secure that going concern assessment. So thank you to everybody for their assistance with that. The charity, as you know, did adapt very well and also very quickly to an evolving situation as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our operating environment changed rapidly overnight, and I'm really proud of all of our colleagues who have continued to work in this challenging circumstance to close down and successfully restart twice now the services that we provide for culture, sport and leisure. We rapidly pivoted from being an on-site, face-to-face service provider to being able to engage with our customers and motivate them with virtual classes and activities, online exhibitions, a variety of different shows that happened online, and as we started to come out of the pandemic lockdown, to outdoor activities that they could take part in safely. You'll see in the annual report that there's information in general about our reintroduction of services across all 5 of the family of service areas based on the financial envelope that was available, and also supported by the external grants that we were able to secure during 2020-21. We also have our partner focus, which this year comes from Creative Scotland, and in past years you'll have seen those from Sports Scotland, Scottish Library Information Council and others. We've particularly highlighted 5 case studies which have looked at celebrating Book Week Scotland. For this year, it was the first time that we particularly did that online. So again, another example of how we've adapted to the situation in which we found ourselves. We continued to offer the Visual Art and Craft Maker Awards, which is highlighted within the annual report. As you've heard at Council previously, we had development of the Angus Alive app, and just wanted to update you that we've now had almost 10,000 downloads of that app, which at the time of the period that's covered by the report was at 2,000 downloads. We were delighted to introduce our family inclusive bike bubble sessions at Maniki Country Park, and to work with a number of partners to support Lighting Up Angus to mark a number of different events, including the 75th anniversary of VE Day, and particularly important at the moment in terms of the events that are unfolding in the world just now, and Remembrance Sunday to Armistice Day, but also particularly this past year, looking at the support of NHS and key workers. Finally, before inviting any questions, I also just wanted to mark the fact that we celebrated our 5th birthday of the charity on the 1st of December 2020. obviously a very different year to celebrate something like that, but it gave us an opportunity to thank the local community for their support and understanding over the year of 2020-21. And as an essential part of our recovery is going to be their continued participation in the range of activities that we're able to offer. And I invite everybody to join us and to come along. Our team's ready and excited to welcome them back.
Thank you. Bids for questions? Councillor Duff?
Yeah, thanks, convener, and thanks, Kirsty. I just wondered if it might be helpful to give elected members a view of what's happening in particularly the leisure sector across Scotland, because obviously we know how badly that's hit Angus Alive. Obviously the cultural side has been hit as well, but in terms of revenue, it's the sports centres that really are hitting us financially. Just are we typical? Are we worse? Are we better than the rest of Scotland and indeed the UK? If you can give us an update on that, I think that'd be helpful.
Councillor Whiteside?
Would you like me to respond to that question first?
Hang on, Kirsty, please.
Yeah, just a very quick question on page 227, please.
227. Any other bids? No, if you could answer Councillor Duff's question, please.
Thanks, convener. So with regards to recovery in terms of particularly Be Active membership, which is the vast majority of the income that comes in for sport and leisure, I've continued to meet very regularly, initially on a weekly basis with colleagues from across Scotland. We are a member of Community Leisure Scotland, which is an organisation that represents all the charitable trusts across the country, and actually also represents those in England as well through the UK branch. At those sessions, what we have confirmed throughout the pandemic is that our position is very much aligned to the position that's being felt in the vast majority of cases. There are one or two outliers on either side. So there's one trust where there is a return rate for their membership that's a lot less than the rest of the trusts in Scotland. And there's a couple where the return rate is slightly higher at about 65 to 70%. But for the vast majority of trusts, it's sitting between 60 and 70% of pre-pandemic income. And that is the ballpark where we are featuring as well. We returned at around 60% of income, and we have then seen that basically kind of plateau at that level. Since the relaxation of rules following the changes over the last month in terms of tone and the move to living with the pandemic over the next period of time, we are starting to see that ever so slightly creep up, but we're still under the 65% level. The impact of that, as well as the fact that across other types of income, which are sitting at a lower level than that 60% level, we're overall about £1.4 million short in terms of earned income that we generate for ourselves.
Thank you. Councillor Whiteside, page 227.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Kirsty. It's just a little point. I'm sure all the existing board members make a really valuable contribution to the running of Angus Alive. It's just slightly disappointing to see that it's still very male dominated, and I'm just wondering if there's any plans to put any mechanisms in place to try and improve the gender balance.
Thank you, Councillor Whiteside, and can assure you that is something that has been discussed regularly at the board whenever we've undertaken recruitment for independent directors. We changed our advertisement where we are looking for directors to make sure that it was really explicit about the fact that we welcomed applicants from all different backgrounds, and we would encourage people to apply to make sure that the diversity of our communities that we represent within the board are then shown through the board in terms of the people that are sitting on that. I think it's quite challenging in terms, as it is for any organisation, because you have to then also look at the best candidates that are putting forward applications to join. But it is definitely something that I can assure you that the board have looked at and are keen to ensure could be addressed in the future as well. And I think that conversations about the future makeup of the board will continue to reflect that.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, do we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Kirsty, I think we probably don't want to hang around any longer, so we'll excuse you from now on. Right, item 9 is the internal audit activity update. Can I ask Kathy Wiley to take us through this? And it's page 233.
Thank you, Convener. This is the normal activity update for the progress with the annual plan and also where we are with the implementation of the recommendations. And we'll have one ask of you just to confirm that we can put the finance capacity review back into the pool at this stage, because we're not sure when that will actually be restarted. If I just take you to page 237 before we get into the specific reports that we're bringing to you today, just a short update in terms of just to confirm that the audit work involving the procurement work is still progressing, but it is progressing slowly. The audit team member who was on loan to the Council Emergency Centre returned to the audit team full-time on the 31st of January or the 1st of February, not quite sure which one landed at the weekend, but anyway, he's back with us now, and that's letting us get caught up with some of the work that had been on hold because he wasn't available. And then the final bit there is just asking for permission to put that that consultation work back into the pool, because it's unclear whether that work, when that work will actually restart, if indeed it does restart. I take you now, yeah, and apologies, I don't know, at the bottom of page 237 in my copy, the rows seem to have got very, very long. I'm not entirely sure what happened there, but anyway, the information does seem to all be there. I'm going now to page 342 to start with the three things that we're reporting this time round, which is around the data analysis, the non-domestic rates and the IT user access administration.
Kathy, can I just stop you there? You said 342. Did you mean 242?
I did indeed mean 242, sorry.
Right, Kathy, carry on.
Okay. So in terms of the data analysis, we have not been able to do any further testing on payroll since we last reported, but we have updated the creditors' work on people who have both registered and processed invoices for payments for October and November, when I'm on to page 343 now. And there were no instances of someone doing both parts of that processing, apart from some instances where there was some testing going on around the P2P payments that are currently being undertaken by IT, and as a result of the testing that had been done, there was some evidence where people appeared to have done both, but it wasn't really that they had done both. The duplicate payments were only tested for April because from after April it's all been tested by the NFI work, which you will get a report on in due course. There's a new area of continuous auditing that we've introduced, and we're currently in the process of looking at lists that we've had from IT around system access, where we're testing people's names where people have got access to our systems, but they've either never logged into them or they haven't logged in for the last 21 days. In terms of looking at the people who've never logged into the system, we did identify 4 people who were removed from access because they no longer worked from the council, and we're currently still working on the not logged on for 21 days report, and we'll bring back an update on that to the next committee. Non-domestic rates is an area that was included in the plan on a cyclical basis because it is a key system for the council, and we looked at just the to provide assurance that there was an adequate control framework in place governing the billing and the collection of NDR in Angus. I'm on page 245 now. So we looked at general things like the overall control framework and the backup regime, and then there were a number of objectives around liability and billing and collection and monitoring. And you'll see at the bottom of page 245 that the overall level of assurance given for this support is a comprehensive assurance. We didn't make any recommendations as a result of the audit. You'll see on page 246 and 47 that every one of the objectives that we looked at came out green. And then very briefly on the bottom of page 247, there is a couple of things that the NDR staff were in the process of working on while we were doing the audit, which was around putting the guidance manual onto OneNote and also bringing all the bank reconciliation guidance notes fully up to date. So before I go on to the IDOC's user management, I'd like to hand that one over to Paul Kelly from Assets because they undertook that work. But I just want to say a brief item about the last section in the report, which is around the recommendations for internal audit and counter fraud. I don't have anything to specifically highlight there. All the old items that have been there for quite a long time are all gone now, and we're back to more up-to-date items. But if it's okay with you, Convener, now I can hand over to Paul to talk about the IDOC's system work.
Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Cathy. So members will recall that in previous years we've undertaken reviews of this nature, looking at the user access management activity around about key business systems. And we've set out in the background on page 248 of the report what the IDOC system is used for, and it's probably worth adding a little bit of clarity there. We mentioned there it's just planning and building control applications, but it has got a much wider use than that. It covers tracking of leases and mail management, etc., electronically. So this report has been given a limited assurance review, and we set out on page 249 and page 250 the reasons for that. And a number of the issues we've identified here are similar to those we've identified in previous reviews. One of the main issues we found was the lack of controls over user account access, user account management and access management. And we found a large number of accounts within IDOCs that hadn't been used for some time, and we believe some of those people might have even left the council as well. And also some concerns over privileged access accounts too. There was no monitoring of access either within the system, and some of the password configuration wasn't consistent with council policy. So as I say, they echo some of the comments from previous years, and part of the reasons for this is that the people who are doing these tasks, it isn't part of their day-to-day job necessarily, and we're recommending that again the digital and IT team maybe look to take on greater responsibility for a wider range of council systems, so that we have better resource pooling and consistency of practices across that. So that was all I planned to say, and happy to hand back to Cathy if she's got anything more to add to that.
Cathy?
No, I think the only thing to add to that really is just to say that it's disappointing to see the same issues coming up again, and I hope that we'll be able to make some inroads to make sure that when we look at our user access, because we do this kind of work every year on a rolling basis with different systems, I really hope the next time I report on this it's a substantial or comprehensive assurance that we're able to give.
Thank you. Questions? Bids? No bids for questions? Councillor Bell?
Thank you. Page 240 for me. I was going to ask about IDOCs, but I think you've covered it off, although I got chucked out of the meeting and I didn't hear when the next report would be due.
Okay, you perhaps cover that, Cathy?
Yes.
When we get 240, going back the way. Yes, Councillor Bell, page 240.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it was the corporate parenting audit, Kath, if that had been scoped out yet, or if it's even a national template that would support that audit? Thanks.
I'll answer your corporate parenting item first. I'm in the process of scoping that corporate parenting audit at the moment. I've read quite a lot of information that's available within the council. I'm almost at the point where I'm about to start engaging with members of staff just to make sure that I've picked up everything that I should have done, and then we'll get that started very soon. On your other item about the next report, can I just clarify, do you mean the next report to committee or the next report around IDOCS itself or user access?
The next report about IDOCS particularly.
So what we do normally is we do a different system every year and we bring that report up, and the actions that have been agreed just go into the normal follow-up, and we don't generally bring back a follow-up, although I know we have done that in the past on, I think it was Integra we did. If you would like us to bring back a report on IDOCS, then we can have a look at that. I can't off the top of my head remember what the date that we said in the action plan the actions would be completed by, but we can certainly look at bringing back a follow-up report for that, particularly as part of the user access work that we do next year.
Okay. Right, two latecomers. Councillor Duff.
Convener, I mean, I just wanted maybe some reassurance. We're all aware that IDOCS is used in the election process for verifying postal votes. There isn't any possibility that we could have any issues here. I just wonder if Cathy could give us some reassurance. I don't want to start hairs running on this one because there's enough conspiracy theorists on postal votes to bore us all, but just give us some reassurance, please.
Yes, before we start, Cathy, Councillor Braze, do you have a page number?
Yeah, I suppose.
Okay, can you answer Councillor Duff's questions on IDOCS and elections?
I can't answer that specifically around elections at the moment. I don't know whether Paul would be able to answer that if that was part of what he looked at, but it's probably something we could come back to later if not.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that either, Cathy. I think that's something we need to get back to you on.
Right, and Councillor Braze, page 233.
Well, it's really to do with the recommendations. The only one we're asked to agree is to move the finance service capacity review to the pool, and you did, I think, touch on that. But you know, I just wanted a wee bit of comfort that you're quite okay doing so. I suppose it's because we don't really scrutinise and audit things just for the pure joy of it. Although I do sometimes wonder about our convener, but yeah, just a wee bit of comfort there. Thanks.
Yeah, this was a consultancy piece of work where we were adding some help with the analysis and the sending out of questionnaires to a piece of work that the finance department had planned, where they were seeking information from other councils to try and benchmark against. Now we didn't get a very good response to the first pass of this, and obviously a lot of things have happened in the last couple of years which have meant that it really hasn't been able to be progressed. So on that basis, I'm comfortable from the conversation that I had with the Director of Finance that's okay to do that, but he might have a comment that he might like to give you about this.
Mr. Lorimer.
Yeah, thank you, convener. As Cathy said, the issue with this questionnaires that we'd sent out were really the timing. The timing of those coincided with the start of the COVID pandemic, and it's really just one of those things that, in terms of our priorities and the priorities for colleagues in other councils, it's not been possible to kind of get back onto that. It is something that I remain slightly concerned about, and I still want to do that kind of benchmarking work to see where we are relative. So it's not gone away, but it's not something that we need to progress right at this minute. So that's why I'm comfortable, as Cathy is, with deferring it, and we'll come back to it when the time is right. Thanks.
Okay,
that's all I needed. That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Fine, thank you. Right, if there's no further questions, the recommendations are on page 233. Do we agree the recommendations? Agreed. Thank you. Move on to item 10 on page 254. And this is the annual internal audit plan 2022-23. Cathy, please.
Yes, thank you, Convener. This is the plan which has been prepared just more or less in the same way as it usually is. It's a risk-based plan which takes into consideration the risks that the council faces, the items that are recorded in the corporate risk register. We talk to all the individual directors and also some of the managers and some of the key systems in the council. We look at what the context that we're working in a national situation is, and just consider all sorts of information that is available to kind of focus on where we should be putting our audit effort to give the most assurance to both yourselves and also to the officers in the coming year. The one thing that has changed slightly this year is the assurance mapping work that we've done. If you recall, that was something that was in the SIAS action plan last year, that we would improve that. And so we have done quite a bit of work with the individual services to identify where their assurance routes come from, and we'll be able to use that information when we're scoping audits going forward. There's still a bit of work to do just to pull all of that together fully. And that will be done in the course of the next 2 or 3 months, so that when we come into the planning for next year, we can use that as a basis for the discussions that we have with the individual services. So I think I want to go now to page 263, where there is a table there which just shows you the amount of available days in both audit team and counter fraud team terms, and how that work is sort of allocated. And then the next page, I think, is the allocation of the audit days against the different headings in terms of governance, financial governance, IT governance, etc. For those of you who prefer to see pictures rather than numbers, the following page has got a sort of pie chart showing the percentages of that time split in terms of the areas that we're spending our audit time on. The general recurring audit and corporate work is quite a large section of that, so that covers the work that we do on SIAS, and this year we'll have to reciprocate the external review that was done for us in 2020 by carrying one out for another council. There's contingency time in there, the work that we do on follow-ups is in there, all the time that myself and other members of the team spend involved with corporate groups, planning that this report ends up with, the time we spend preparing and coming to audit committees, and a little bit of work around reviewing reports that come from other bodies such as Audit Scotland is all lumped into that amount, which is why that is such a large part of the time. I don't want to say a huge amount more. Just below that table, we're saying there that we believe that allocation is appropriately aligned to the risk profile, and it will address the assurance needs of the council for 22-23. I'm comfortable that it covers enough work for me to be able to provide my annual assurance. If I had more resources, I would be doing a bit more around the cyclical work, because we've had to lengthen the cycles between the years when we do some of that work just because of the resource that's available, but I still think it's sufficient to allow me to give my annual assurance statement. And I think that's really all I want to draw attention to. Obviously, there's 2 plans there. There's the set audits, and then we have a pool, so that if any of the set audits can't be undertaken, we'll be able to bring things through from the pool to replace them without having to go into major reassessment mode. There were 2 or 3 members who did get in touch with me when I contacted you before the plan was put together. We haven't included any of the issues that they raised in this plan this year, apart from the participatory budgeting, but I have spoken to the individual members, and we've had a conversation about when I might bring these items back into a future review. So I'm happy now just to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Right, bids for questions. Councillor Devine.
Very general question, Convener.
Okay, anyone else? No. Councillor Devine, general question.
Thanks. Kathy, do you remember we suggested at one point that we should get an A4 page of the duties of the Scrutiny and Audit Committee so that we could give these to potential councillors, candidates. Now we have candidates in line now, and it would be really helpful if we could do that. Actually, we could probably do that with it for most of the committees, but certainly we want people to know what they're in for if they're coming on to Scrutiny and Audit. Have you given that any thought? I know you've been terribly busy.
Yes, after the last self-assessment meeting that we had, when that was discussed, I passed on the information that came out of that to various other people who are involved in member induction, and I have provided the SIPFA information that talks about the responsibilities of committees. I've provided that to the officers who are pulling together the information for the potential new candidates. The other thing, which I can't remember if I've given her this or not, but I can check this after the meeting. There is obviously also the Scrutiny and Audit Committee remit, which I think might be 2 A4 pages or a little bit more than that, but it's a little bit more sort of specific than the full pages of guidance are. So I'll make sure that that's been passed on as well.
Thank you. Councillor Whiteside.
Sorry, my hand was a little bit late there. Thank you, Convener. Kathy, I was just wondering if you could give me a little bit more information about page 269, the private water supplies testing. Just wondering what the scope of that is. What kind of private water supplies do you test, and what powers are there if there's any problems unearthed?
This is a piece of work that's been brought forward from about, I can't remember now, it's been in the plan for about 3 years or so. And it was brought into the plan because there was a change in the legislation around the testing that we as a council are required to do. And what this piece of audit work is about is making sure that we're actually undertaking the testing that we are legally responsible to test. There was a delay in getting some of this in place, and then with just everything else that's been going on, it's just been put back, and that's why it's coming a bit later than it would normally have done. I usually like to bring this kind of piece of work in fairly soon after the regulations have changed so that we can make sure we've addressed them properly, but I still think it's worth making sure now that that has been properly implemented. I don't know if there's someone else here who might be able to tell you more about what the actual responsibilities are.
Don't think we need to know what the actual responsibilities are. If somebody wants to dig that in, they can ask questions later. Right, if there's nothing else, do we agree the recommendations on page 254? Is that agreed? Thank you.
Agreed.
Can we now move on to the external audit commencing on page 276? And can I ask Mr. Lorimer to introduce this? And I'm hoping that Rachel Brown is somewhere around.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I'm happy to introduce this report. I'm going to pass over to Carol Grant. I see Carol Grant is actually on the call.
Okay, thank you.
I think Carol's actually going to speak to this one today. So it's Carol's audit plan. This will be the final audit for Carol's team before there's a change of auditor. But I'll hand over at this point to Carol because it's her plan. Thank you.
Fine, thank you. Carol, please.
Thank you. So the plan in front of you is just a summary of the audit work that we've planned for the 21-22 audit year. Just as Ian has mentioned, to draw your attention to paragraph 9 on page 280, which talks about the transition to next year's audits, because this is the last year of our audit appointment. And just to confirm that we will work, when we find out who the new auditor will be, we will work closely to ensure it's a smooth transition for yourselves. Moving on to page 281, Exhibit 1 just highlights the materiality levels that we've set for the audit, and those are consistent with the prior year, so there's nothing in particular that I'm drawing your attention to in relation to that. Exhibit 2 on page 282, starts on page 282, highlights the significant risks that we've identified, and these will help focus our audit work for the year. So the first one is the risk of material misstatement due to fraud caused by management override of controls. That is a generic risk that is prescribed by the auditing standards. We cannot rebut it, but it was just to be clear that it isn't anything specific for Angus Council. It's just areas of audit work that we have to do as part of the auditing standards. The second risk, and this is on page 283, is estimation in the valuation of land and buildings. It's partly due to the kind of inherent degree of subjectivity and the assumptions of the valuer, but also just specifically the fact that there has been material valuation uncertainty disclosures for the last couple of years, and what that means in terms of the valuation cycle. So we are absolutely working with finance colleagues just to discuss what that means and get an approach in place to ensure there's sufficient audit evidence to support that, and we will target our audit work in that way. Just to say, on page 284, at paragraph 14 and 15, the auditing standards presume a risk of fraud in both income, and that is extended in practice note 10 to expenditure in the public sector. Because of the planning work that we have done, the analysis that we've done, we have rebutted these risks for Angus Council, but I just felt it was important to draw them to your attention. At paragraph 17 on the same page, we do also point to specific work that we'll be doing in relation to the pension liability valuation. Again, it's because of the inherent estimation that exists within the pensions, and also the materiality of that for the accounts. On page 285, we just highlight also the audit of the trusts that are registered as Scottish charities, and at Exhibit 3 we highlight the materiality levels we'll be working to for the audits. But again, there's nothing particular I'm looking to draw to your attention in relation to that. So that really moves us on to page 288. Just to say, at paragraph 29, we refer to the Best Value Assurance Report that's due to be published for the Council in June 2022. I know the team have been engaging with many in this meeting, and just to thank you for your continued encouragement and support in relation to that process. We are currently pulling together the emerging messages in relation to that work, and it is progressing well. The final thing, well, nearly final thing, just to see on page 290 at Exhibit 6, we just highlight the planned audit outputs. And moving on to Exhibit 7 on page 291, that outlines the timescales that we're working to, and we are in communication with finance looking to bring the sign-off of the annual accounts forward a month from last year. We are still in a kind of transition period in relation to the recovery from the pandemic, but we are hoping to be able to achieve that this year as a further progress in relation to that recovery. The audit fee is highlighted at paragraph 41, and there is a small increase from last year, which is consistent across the sector. I think that was all. One final thing, apologies, on page 293 at paragraph 46, just to confirm that there are no issues in terms of independence or objectivity that I'm aware of in relation to the audit team that I would like to draw to your attention. And that is all I was going to say. I'm so happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? In that case, do we agree the recommendations on page 276? Is that agreed? Thank you.
Great.
Okay, let's move on to item 12. Detailed risk reporting for the Scrutiny and Audit Committee. And if I remember rightly, this is climate change this time. Yes, Director of Vibrant Communities and Sustainable Growth for Climate Change.
Thank you. Is it going to be Jill Patterson and Karen Webster who'll take us through that one?
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm joined today by Karen Webster, who's our project officer for climate change, who's fairly recent in this post, just to take you through the corporate risk around climate change. It's really quite timely for us looking at this, and sort of in a response to Cathy asking us to take you through this detailed risk, we've also taken the opportunity, and Karen's actually gone through and reviewed the corporate risk in relation to climate change. So I'll provide you with a bit of an overview and then get Karen to take you through the detailed actions that we've reviewed quite recently and included within that. So I mentioned it was quite timely in terms of where we're at, particularly in the context of the recent declaration of climate emergency at national level and international level. Also, just the recent impacts of climate change and severe weather events on Angus, I think, is showing the impacts of what happens if we don't take this risk quite seriously. And also really the increased focus that Angus Council has placed on climate change, both in terms of the declaration, but also the restructure within the teams to have a dedicated post leading on climate change and a revised remit of the environment team. So I mentioned that we'd undertaken a review of the corporate risk. Previously, there was only a couple of additional actions in there, and I think taking a fresh look at it was 2045 is not that far away in terms of emissions for net zero. And I mean, I go back to an old phrase, which is think local and act global. Whilst you don't see the changes straight away, you have to take action now. And really, what I suppose we wanted to highlight through the corporate risk this afternoon was the importance of taking that action now in order to have any chance of meeting those targets and moving things forward. I suppose one of the things is why we need to place such great importance on that. Angus Council really needs to be a leader in that context. If we're expecting our communities, we're expecting our businesses and others to follow suit. Within our own activities, we have quite a number of different range of things across the council that have an impact in terms of climate change, and we need to ensure that is embedded in all activities, and all services across the council and those partners that we work with place high importance of terms of addressing things moving forward. We have a broad range of existing controls in place, but we need to translate those into actions. And we've tried to do that at a corporate level in this review, and as I say, Karen has looked at that in detail. Some of our existing controls that we have in place are statutory requirements under the Climate Change Scotland Act, some of our mandatory reporting. These are all fine and fine to have in place, but if we're not moving things forward, then this is in terms of the impact of that. We've got various other measures and control in place, and I suppose a couple to highlight to you that are sort of an addition and fairly recent things, and Karen will cover one of these in a little bit more detail, is the local heat and energy efficiency strategies. We've currently got a draft order going forward in relation to that, and a strategy to be in place by the end of 2023. It's a significant amount of work across the council, so Karen will cover that in a little bit more detail around one of the actions in relation to that. I mentioned the tie-up between climate change and the nature crisis. I think within Angus as a rural authority, again, we have to be a leader in this context. We have significant opportunity to take forward climate change adaptation, and that needs to be a key function as one of our controls moving forward if we're to manage and maintain this risk. So at the moment, as I say, we have undertaken this review, which has increased the overall risk score, but we've also put in place a number of additional controls and measures to help manage and reduce this. So previously we had in place the publication of the Sustainable Energy and Climate Change Plan and Climate Action Plan, which was reported back to committee in the 4th of November for approval. So that action has been progressed. We're then moving on to the delivery and monitoring of the Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan actions that are within that. Now, At present, a lot of those focuses in on corporate activities, and I think we're very well placed in terms of the corporate activity, which Karen will take you through. Appointment of a CCAP officer in due course will allow us to extend that activity out into the businesses and communities and develop that partnership working, which is absolutely imperative to the CCAP success. It cannot work just looking at corporate activity. So at the moment, that is still remains a green. I think once we have that resource in place, we'd like to see that move an awful lot quicker forward, but we're just reliant on that additional support, which is currently in the recruitment process at present. I'll lead on to the corporate activity, which I'll get Karen to take you through because she knows it an awful lot more in depth than I do. And once Karen's finished, we can take you through any questions that you might have. Karen?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. The next, row 3, submit the annual public bodies duties report. This is where the emissions from Angus Council are reported to the Scottish Government. This is done annually each November. The emissions predominantly come from energy and water, waste and recycling, and transport. We also include extra information in the report about the profile of the council, governance, projects we're undertaking, adaptation, and there's a section about sustainable procurement as well. The next row is establish council boundary emissions. There's territorial emissions estimates that are published by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. They are used to monitor net zero and other UK-wide targets. So within these territorial emissions estimates, we need to determine what scopes and sectors that we want to include within the Angus boundary emissions. And this will then determine a baseline which will measure future progress against. The next row, calculate Angus's carbon insetting potential. Angus Council will have buildings, for instance, that are hard to treat and operations that are difficult to decarbonise. So the insetting potential needs to be calculated to determine how much we need to reduce the operational emissions by to achieve net zero. So insets are activities within an organisation's operational boundaries, such as the carbon sequestration of our own land. So a calculation needs to be done to identify the volume of carbon sinks that we have, so like woodlands, grasslands, peatlands that are available on council land, so we can balance off emissions that we're finding hard to decarbonise. There'll also have to be another exercise done to determine where the council has suitable land where we could improve our sequestration. Put simply, maybe council land where we could potentially plant more trees, for instance. The next row, carry out a net zero review of Angus Council to inform a net zero plan to 2030. 2030 is the second interim target, so this is a 75% reduction compared to the baseline. So as I said earlier, we report annually to the Scottish Government via the public bodies reporting. We've got kind of an extra duty as well. So as I said earlier, like the emissions predominantly come from energy and water, waste recycling and transport, but we have a duty to review all council functions to ensure they're directly or indirectly contributing to the Scottish Government's net zero target by 2045. So a net zero review of the council and a subsequent production of a net zero action plan will identify the key areas within the council operations that the council need to prioritise up to 2030. So these actions will obviously we'll have to look at them with what's possible within available resources to meet the 2030 target. And I kind of envisage this will be like a working document, and it will evolve as technologies emerge and mature and sort of new techniques and practices develop. So the next row is produce a local heat and energy efficiency strategy. So this is termed an LHES. And this is what Jill spoke about earlier. So LHES was introduced in 2016, and it aims to establish plans and priorities for systematically improving the energy efficiency of buildings and decarbonising heat across an entire local authority area. So at the turn of the year, there was a draft LHES order put out for consultation, and it proposes placing a statutory duty on local authorities to produce an LHES and associated delivery plans. And as Jill said, there's a challenging timescale being proposed by the end of 2023. So we put a funding bid forward to Zero Waste Scotland for some consultancy time to help us kind of start our LHES journey. So we've been successful in that. So we've got 2 workshops coming up for capacity building for LHES. And as I say, that will assist us on our journey. The next row is mandatory e-learning for staff. We'd like staff to be well informed about climate change and how it affects Angus Council and Angus as a whole. We hope staff will consider climate change impacts in their work, and hopefully everybody will have the ability and the motivation to reduce emissions, whether it's at work or at home. The next row, embed climate change impacts into all Angus Council activities and decisions. We'd like elected members and management to have an awareness of carbon emissions and costs and the impacts of everyday council activities. Climate change impacts will be quantified during decision-making processes, and I've been working with Sustainable Scotland Network on climate impact assessments. There's a working group and some guidance that are going to be coming out from them to help develop this. Next row is access to funding via council monies and loans to progress net zero projects. We need various large-scale projects to be completed to ensure we reach all of our interim targets and the net zero target by 2045. We may need to do some partnership working, whether it's with other local authorities or entering potentially some kind of commercial agreements, depending on what kind of projects we look to proceed with. And the last row, develop and deliver a programme of land use adaptation projects. These projects will need to be delivered at a landscape scale, corporately and with stakeholders, and we'll need to secure external funding for the delivery of these projects. They will ensure that climate change mitigation and adaptation will be achieved on a large scale. And that's me.
Okay, bids for questions? Councillor Bell.
Page 301, please, convener.
Councillor Devine.
Sorry, not sure of the page. It was about training.
Right, okay, I'll find that. Right, Councillor Bell, page 301.
Okay, thanks very much, and it's lovely to see you again, Karen, after quite a long time. I'm not on anything to do with planning, so I'm afraid I'm coming from a real position of ignorance here, but I've got concerns around the landscape scale and working with stakeholders, especially in relation to the planning process and any developments organisations might have. What sort of work has been done to raise awareness from their perspective, if you like, around what is coming towards them in terms of adaptations? I'm just a bit concerned that there isn't a mind meld on that front at the moment. Does anyone have an idea? Thanks.
I'd be happy to come back on that, Councillor Bell. I think we are still at quite an early stage. I think we've got some pockets where there's some really good awareness and there's some fantastic projects underway with a couple of colleagues in our environment team. One of the aspects of the restructure has brought back together the development plan and the environment team, and the inclusion of climate change as part of that. Now that gives us a fantastic opportunity in terms of the new style development plans, which are a very different beast to what they have been. And the fact that National Planning Framework has underpinned a green infrastructure first approach and climate change as its underpinning targets for everything. Now that will feed through to our local development plan, and our structure in place across the two teams puts us in a really good position to progress that. So we would anticipate a lot of that engagement work on a land use context being progressed through that development plan approach. The revised format of development plans is aimed to look at much more of a delivery and implementation than a process, which it has been before. It's very much just been a process of plan making. It's now to be a clear plan and a big focus on delivery and implementation. And that delivery programme actually sits at the Chief Executive level for how you're going to implement your land use strategy over the next 10 years. Now, Karen mentioned the importance of tying up with funding bids. We would anticipate the hook for those funding bids and those key areas to involve that engagement at the outset and set a clear master plan for where we want to work and who we want to work with in terms of taking that forward. So I don't know if that directly answers, but it hopefully gives you a bit of a flavour of where we're headed. And I would agree with you that we've got an awful lot still to do in relation to that landowner work, particularly given the opportunities that they present. But I think we're in a really good position with bringing climate change much more into the fold with the environment team, and like Karen's now dedicated post. And I would say the amount she's achieved in just a few months in post has been fantastic.
Thanks very much.
Councillor Devine, I think you're on e-learning, is it?
No, just training, really.
Just training.
I just wanted to welcome Karen because I've not met her. I am on the climate change MOG, which of course is going to change its name soon, like this week probably. I was wondering about, you mentioned workshops for staff and for us as well, the elected members, I think. Are you going to be working along with APSI on that? Because I know that they've got training programmes kind of on the shelf, as it were. And I'm also very pleased to hear about the climate impact assessment, because we talked about that maybe about a year ago within the MOG. So that's great to see that coming forward. Thank you. So I don't really have, well, the question would be, are you working with APSI?
Not yet is probably the best answer. Yeah, I'm not too sure. APSI, they do have some resources available as well. There is other ones through the SSN's, the Scotland Sustainable Network as well. So at the moment, I'm just kind of looking at what resources are like readily available, or if there's something, or if there is maybe a few resources that will maybe tailor to our own resource, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'm aware of the APSI training packages that are out there. It's just kind of seeing which one suits us best, to be honest, for sort of staff and sort of elected members and management.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Right, if we're done with that one, do we agree the recommendations on page 296?
Yes.
Agreed.
Thank you. I've got the final item now. The page 302, Regulation of Investigatory Powers, Scotland Act, Quarterly Report. Mrs. Buchanan.
Yes, just a very short terms of the detail. We advise members at every quarterly meeting about the surveillance powers and whether they've been exercised or not, and it's just to confirm that they weren't exercised during the period from 1st July to 30th September last year.
Any questions? No questions. Agree the recommendations to note?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Well, before we go, I'd just like to record my thanks, particularly to Cathy Wiley, but to all the officers who've had input to the Scrutiny Audit Committee over the past 5 years. It's been interesting to see how the work has developed over the years, and how much more we are being asked to read every time. But I'm quite sure everybody has found it interesting. I deliberately adopted a policy early on of not making many statements myself, but giving you all the opportunity to make as many questions as you wanted, which I think is a bit different to some of the other committees, but it's been very enjoyable. So as I will be seeing the members only, possibly with Cathy, on the 10th, I'll give my thanks now to all the other officers who have been involved with scrutiny and audit over the past 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you.
Convener.
Thank you.